Hello, everyone. My name is Pooja Mistry. I am a developer advocate at Postman, and I'm sure maybe some of you might have heard of Postman or have used it, at least to send one API request in your life. So we have a room full of developers. Can I get a show of hands? Has anyone sent an API request with Postman? All right, it's wonderful. Good to know. Good to know I'm in a crowd of users. So I want to feel like this today, but I'm a little tired, to be honest. I just got off of a plane not too long ago, but I want to talk about Postman, but also the big elephant that's in the room with us over the last couple of years, which is all things AI, LLMs. OpenAI has taken the world by a storm. Anthropic, Perplexity, every single AI tool that is out there. And so we're all blown away by what it can do and its capabilities. But when we think about APIs, it really has shaped how we now design APIs a little bit. So before the rise of all of these APIs, all of these AI products, we were designing APIs for human consumers in mind. But now, what most people don't realize is that we have to now change the way we design APIs because the consumer of APIs is no longer your developer next door. It is the AI agent that you are going to be designing your API for. So if you didn't know, AI agents execute tasks through APIs. And when you go and you ask your favorite chatty G for something, it's not just giving you that information from the internet. It's actually using a lot of different APIs behind the scenes. And for example, if you're even asking what the weather is, and for me, it was asking about just trying to find this location actually, which was very hard to do. I don't know if anyone else had that problem, but I really struggled hard. But it's using APIs behind the scenes, right? So when you think about agents, you're working with APIs that are going to be behind the scenes. And so at Postman, we are obsessed with APIs. And so when you start thinking about APIs, you realize that AI agents don't actually do anything on their own. They don't fetch data by themselves. They don't book their meetings. They don't trigger workflows. What they do is they call APIs. So every time you see some sort of AI assistant schedule any event, spin up any environment, this means that if you can build an API, you can build AI. So now you have to think about how are you going to build APIs that are AI ready, right? And it makes you think about what makes an API AI ready. As developers, we have to start thinking about things a little bit. If a computer is going to consume my API, how do I design my API in such a way that any agent can now operate with it? At Postman, we do what we do best, which is make a lot of lists and come up with a lot of API characteristics. So we actually came up with 8 critical characteristics. And so I wanted to take this time, especially in a room full of developers, to think about what makes an API AI ready. And I'll get a show of hands. Does anybody know? I have a whole list here, but what has made an API AI ready? Are you guys even thinking about building your APIs for AI consumption? Any thoughts here? Yes? All right. It's something we all have to think about now. When we think about AI ready APIs, the first thing that we really need to think about are your APIs need to have some sort of machine consumable metadata. Ideally, humans and AI, they process things fundamentally differently. So when you get some metadata like this endpoint accepts a user ID and returns a user preference, we as a human, we've worked with APIs. We think about user IDs and we're like, okay, maybe this is a GET request, probably take some sort of UUID and return some sort of JSON object with some sort of key value pair. But when you have some sort of machine consuming it, it has no knowledge of any of this. You have to create some metadata that enables an agent to integrate with it instantly without waiting on an engineer. So you're trying to cut any bottleneck. So what this means for all of you developers is to amp up your documentation. And this also changes the way that we handle our error semantics as well. So when you have some error semantics like this where something went wrong, as a developer, we know how to troubleshoot that, right? We know what went wrong, where we can go wrong, but an AI system has none of this troubleshooting knowledge. So when you are designing APIs, it is now more critical than ever to really make your error messages like really detailed in terms of what exactly went wrong, how to go about troubleshooting it. And so this is what a API error message should look like. So it needs to have rich error semantics. So in here, we're not only providing exactly what went wrong, we're providing the invalid parameter, and we're also showing what is expected and what is received. So you have clear structured errors that lets your agent resolve these issues without human help. So this is how you have to start thinking about designing your APIs, which ultimately reduce escalations, dev times, and support leads. Another thing for us to start thinking about is our introspection capabilities. So something that has full introspection, this means that your API fully describes itself. You have endpoints, schemas, parameters, errors, and examples. All of this is now a part of your API schema. So your AI can basically use it without guessing. So AI agents need full structured API definitions. And unlike humans, they can't guess from or pattern fill or fill the gaps without that level of intuition. So you need to build your APIs with complete specifications, right? And ultimately, if you don't do that, what you do is you risk hallucination or you risk broken workflows. And so this kind of gets us to naming patterns. I think as engineers, we can be a little inconsistent when it comes to naming. And so staying very consistent with our endpoints is also what ultimately helps us build more AI-ready APIs. And so for here you have, for example, in this case, I don't know if you guys have done this because I do this all the time. You name your endpoints differently for the same sort of API request. This kind of takes us back, and we can actually use AI to help us keep our naming pretty consistent. So consistent naming is something that is going to help us be more predictable. So the idea here is you have to build APIs that are consistent with patterns. So if your API responses vary, you're going to have a lot of inconsistency when it comes to working and building agents. And so all of this sort of goes to like 4 different things: standardizing response formats, uniforming your naming conventions, being consistent with your errors, and documenting all of these edge cases. So the idea is the more predictable your API is, the better it is going to be for your agents to be used. So ideally, inconsistent input equals unreliable agent behavior. And this is because LLMs, they learn from your API structure, and this is how they build out your responses and give you information without hallucination. And so this is something that we as developers find hard to do sometimes, which is documentation. But today, not only do we have AI to help us with documentation, but we have to drive documentation for the natural language to absorb and create interesting workflows. So for a human developer, if you don't understand something, you can go search that up. But APIs that are well documented, agents can learn everything about your system. So documentation has now been more critical than ever, because not only is your AI agent absorbing the data from your API, but is also taking that data in from your documentation. And this idea takes us to number 7, which is you need your APIs to be reliable and you need your APIs to be fast. So AI agents, they don't operate in isolation. They function as orchestrators, they create rapid, sequential, even sometimes they call parallel APIs together. And so they respond and take action intelligently. So while humans may wait for a response from an AI API, agents will they might time out or they'll break down. So for example, if it takes a developer 5 to 10 seconds to respond to an API, you might just be able to troubleshoot that. However, if your API isn't fast enough, you have agents that will fail. So trying to create APIs that have low predictability latents, clear timeout behavior, and graceful error messages, now you have to think about the speed and the reliability a little bit as well. And then finally, when it comes to APIs, discoverability is more key than ever. For us, if you're looking for an API, we can often Google and find an API, go read their documentations. However, if your API isn't published with the right metadata and it doesn't have the right discoverable endpoint and it's not open access, your API might as well not even exist. So your agents, they can't dig through these internal dashboards. They need to have APIs that are structured, discoverable, standardized, and they need to be able to integrate their APIs on their own. So for your AI APIs to be truly AI ready, you need to have them visible and accessible. So you might be wondering, how do I increase the visibility and the discoverability of my API? So one thing that we have is we have the Postman Public API Network. So the Postman Public API Network, if you haven't heard, is the largest public hub of APIs. It has over 100,000 APIs that are readily available. They're built for visibility, discoverability, and machine readiness. So we have verified publishers, we have global discovery, you can create team profiles, collections, and essentially you have a plethora of APIs that can now be searchable and usable by AI agents. So if you're interested in becoming a publisher on the public API network, you can take a look at this link. But what being visible on Postman's public API network not only gives you the visibility to AI agents, but to developers. And you can think of it as a way to publish like your GitHub repositories for your APIs. And so ultimately, we have gone through these 8 essential makings to making your AI API ready. And so these are some things that we might want to start thinking about when you design your APIs. And so every API is not going to be a public API. There's going to be private internal APIs that you're going to want to build for your teams. So even in that case, these 8 steps are really critical, especially if you end up on a private API network as well. And so with that, I hope you're ready to make some AI-ready APIs. But now that we know what that looks like, let's see what that looks like when it comes to working with AI agents. There's a concept called function calling or tool calling. So what this does is it allows LLMs to interact with API and external tools. So instead of you just generating the text, your LLM can determine a specific action that needs to be taken and then request that action to be performed by an external function. So that function call is a custom function or it can be an API. So I want to show you what that looks like in action because we at Postman have created a way to build AI agents using tool calling. And so tool calling ultimately lets your LLM interpret user's request and decides what action needs to be taken and invoke your API. So what this does is it fundamentally changes what it means to build AI. You don't need to train a model or you don't need to dive into deep ML pipelines. If you have quality APIs, you can use tool calling to basically build AI agents. So to do that, basically, you are bridging the AI layer with your backend logic, and you're using LLMs to basically create workflows. So what that looks like in action in Postman is we have this feature called Postman Flows. So Postman Flows allows you to basically connect a bunch of APIs together and create workflows. And so we have this block here called the AI agent block. So the AI agent block is where you can basically put in your system prompt on how you want to utilize your APIs, and then you can create an entirely interesting agent. So I want to show you what that sort of looks like. So if you've played around with Postman, we have this public workspace called AI on Postman. So if you're interested, you can always Google AI on Postman, and you can find this public workspace. But here I have this flow called the Industry News Updates and Insight Agent. So what this agent does is I'll zoom into this right here. it uses this AI agent block. And here I've said, you are now a newsletter agent. Format the content in a newsletter style with clear hyperlinks and include compelling titles of the top 10 most important topics and don't hallucinate. Keep it under 3,500 characters and send this to Slack, okay? So this AI agent is using some sort of user prompt. I thought that the don't hallucinate part would convince it to not hallucinate. It sometimes does. It sometimes listens to me, and it doesn't hallucinate. So what happens here is I'm using some tools here. What I'm using 4 different APIs: the News API, the Guardian, Gnews, Media Stack, and I'm using these 4 APIs in my AI agent block to basically output something. And here I have it outputted to Slack. But what you can do here is you can basically create a collection of all of the APIs that you're interested in. So for example, your Guardian API, you can set up your Guardian API keys as if you are setting up a collection of your APIs. And so now it's taken all of that data from these specific APIs. And these APIs are designed with AI in mind. If you actually go into the design of Guardian's Search API, Media Stack's API, they're all designed very similarly. And that's what helps my agent take those particular tools and put that into my AI agent model and then send that to Slack. So now that if I ever want to basically talk to Slack and be like, give me the top 10 news stories about AI agents, MCP servers, it'll go and it'll use those API endpoints and it'll find me those stories. So this is how building APIs matters. It matters to build and design APIs that are AI ready so that it can be utilized by agents like this. And so this is just one example of an agent, but we've created a lot of different agents. So we've created agents that score GitHub issues by prioritization agents. We have all of the how-tos on that. We've done a lot of stuff with Slack. We've created agents that analyze YouTube comments, that summarize industry insights. So ultimately, we have a whole plethora of various different agents, but what makes these agents interesting is the APIs that are the bedrock of them. The APIs are what powers these agents. So ultimately, what you have here is that before Postman flows looked something like this. You had to connect all of these little API blocks and try to get this workflow to work. And now you can do something like this. So it takes all of these APIs and it basically uses the LLM system prompt to create your entire workflow. And so if you're interested in working with these agents, you can always check out these agents at postman.com/templates/agents. And this kind of just shows into practice of what it looks like to build APIs that are AI ready and then ultimately create workflows. And so we wanted to create these 10 agents just to inspire developers like you of what is possible. If we were to give you a starting point, a blueprint, maybe you could go ahead and take these agents and these APIs further and build certain things that automate your life. And which brings us here. So what have we done so far? We've made our APIs AI ready. And we've worked with tool calling to build and invoke these agents. But there's one more catch. When it comes to tool calling isn't enough because there's this whole new concept of standardization, which kind of brings us to this brand new thing, which is called MCP, which is basically a way to structure your AI context and turn it from raw tools into reliable, orchestrated action. So MCP, Model Context Protocol, what it does is it standardizes how AI models interact with external tools and data sources for your APIs. So how many of you have worked with MCP servers? Yeah, it's relatively a newer thing, but it's really interesting because I think what this also shows is that the bedrock of MCP is also the APIs, right? So the more quality your APIs, the better you're going to have your AI models interact with these external tools. And so the way that I like to think of MCP is that MCP is the USB-C of the AI world. So before USB-C, You needed different cables for different connections. You need an HDMI cable for this display. You need a USB-C for your phone. I have a lightning charger because I have an iPhone. But this is before MCP, developers, you have to build these custom connections for each and every AI model. But now that MCP is here, it's like the USB-C, right? It lets you connect to countless of devices with a single standard. So MCP becomes the universal adapter between AI models in the digital world, and it allows you to build a connection once, but be compatible with multiple different AI models. And so when you use MCP, you get a unified interface. Your application only needs to know how to talk to that MCP, not a specific quirks of each API. You get standardized context format. So MCP provides consistent way to structure your prompts, your history, your contextual information. It allows you to simplify and switch. So you can simplify and switch out the underlying LLMs without changing your application's code. And you're basically trying to future-proof. So when new models emerge, you only need to update your MCP layer rather than writing your application layer. So when it comes to diving into your MCP journey, as we all will at some point if you work with APIs, you need to think about the fundamental shift between APIs and AI's interaction. So there are 3 actionable steps that you can prepare along the way for the shift, because this is going to be a shift in our new reality for as we start thinking. So start small. Start small with a single high-value API. Don't transform everything at once. Select one business-critical API and make it truly AI-ready. What this does, it enhances its metadata to be explicitly machine-readable. You have to implicitly add those rich error semantics, and you have to ensure those consistent naming patterns. Those are those 8 things that we talked about. So if you're building APIs for external consumption, think about discoverability. So when it comes to once you've enhanced and made your APIs predictable and all of that, now focus on the discoverability. So whether that is publishing them publicly in a public API network or in a private API network, ensure there's a discoverability of your APIs. So this is going to be important when it comes to this whole AI revolution, working with MCPs, all of that. And then also think about being AI first. So when you're now designing your APIs, don't think about the human consumer or the customer consumer in mind. Think about the AI agent that's going to consume your API, the MCP servers that are going to be consuming your API. So this is a mindset shift. So start designing APIs with AI consumers as a primary use case. And so where do we go from here? You can't do AI without quality APIs. So that's the whole point of this talk. Think about design your APIs with AI in mind. And we actually have a MCP server collection if you're interested. We've also published that on Postman's public API network. And if you're interested in learning more about APIs, making your APIs AI ready, you can follow me on LinkedIn or you can connect with me and my team. And we are happy to talk to you guys all about APIs and making your APIs AI ready. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great one.